Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Audio Fanfics and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto discovered the heart hidden under the shadow of Kaguya? Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. For 7 years now, that was all she had been doing. She was little more than a passive observer of the truth. At first, watching was all she had been able to do. It was hardly what one would call ideal, but that was the very nature of her resurrection, in that it hadn't been ideal. It was imperfect, incomplete. In the same way those disgusting humans that would taint her garden world were incomplete, so now was she. Kaguya loathed them, for they had stolen everything from her. Sealed her to the moon for over 1,000 years. Then they forgot about her. That was their first mistake. For she was not something that should be forgotten. It was careless of them. Foolish, even. To think she was some existence so little as to be tossed away from collective thought was the height of incompetence. She, which had once been known as the rabbit goddess and later an Oni, was forgotten. And she would make them pay for it. Because while they may have forgotten, she had not. Her will had not. It had gone by many names over the years. Preferring to think of itself as her son, it would be more accurate to have called it her shadow. It had worked tirelessly for her resurrection and it had finally succeeded, but only in a sense. The shadow knew that in order to restore her, numerous conditions had to be met. So it had secretly been gathering those things over time. Her true son, Hagoromo, had split up her chakra into 9 pieces. So her will collected most of those pieces. Not enough that anyone would notice, just mere slivers of them from the Jinchuriki hosts they inhabited. It had been enough. The reason why, is because alone those pieces of Biju chakra, her chakra, was only a single piece of the equation. Equally important were the eyes. Her son knew she needed those eyes and so had destroyed his own upon death. However, what he failed to foresee was the actions of his own children. For he also had 2 sons. One of them Indra, the other Asura. Those 2 would conflict with one another for centuries and over the course of many reincarnations. Until one day, one of those reincarnates got an idea. No, it wouldn't be right to say he got an idea. He had been fed an idea. By her very own shadow. Indra's reincarnation stole a piece of flesh from Asura's and by grafting it upon himself, he finally awakened those eyes. Even then, it wasn't enough. For him it was too late and he perished soon after having accomplished this task. For the shadow, it was the perfect opportunity. One they had been waiting over 1,000 years for. Taking the eyes, Rinnegan, it implanted them inside itself. Now all the pieces were nearly in place. It had 8 slivers of chakra from the Biju and the Rinnegan eyes cultivated by a reincarnation of Indra. The only thing left was to get the last piece, the Kyubi, strongest Biju of them all. Once it had the merged chakra of all 9 beasts, incomplete as that may be, it would then place the eyes once more in another host. Since the last one had been Indra, this time it would be Asura that they chose. As fate would have it, those 2 things coalesced. Asura's newest reincarnation became the Kyubi Jinchuriki on the night of his birth. Even so, her will couldn't be hasty. They had waited 1,000 years, it wouldn't hurt to wait 5 more. Which is exactly the amount of time that it waited. On the child's 5th birthday, her shadow made its move. Not in a way that anyone ever realized. For the resurrection to be complete, time would be necessary. So it had to give Asura's reincarnation, Uzumaki Naruto, these gifts in a way that no one would immediately recognize. In order to do this, it merged itself with Naruto's shadow. Her will, her own shadow became his. Along with all the things it had gathered. All these things mixed together and became one. Her will couldn't possibly maintain itself amongst such a vortex, and so even that became mere nothing. And from that nothing she was reborn. A mere child. That was right, her form had taken the shadow of its host. So in appearance she may have been much like she had desired, long white hair, pale skin, even reclaiming her ceremonial robes. However, she was small. Inhabiting a 5-year-old had been their mistake, because his shadow only allowed them to take the shape of another 5-year-old. A miscalculation. It was no matter. She would leave, hide herself away in the forests until one day she reclaimed her full adult form. This imperfect resurrection left her without most of her power, so she would need time to recover that anyways. That was what she thought. Her second miscalculation had been assuming she could leave at all. Of course she couldn't, she realized only too late. She had no shadow. That meant there was no place for her under the light of the sun, nor even the moon which just reflected its light. She was trapped, bound to the shadow of Asura's incarnation. Even under such circumstances, she did not panic. There was no need for worry, after all. Even stuck in this shadow, her plans didn't have to change. In time she would achieve adult form and her power would return. That was what she believed. Her third miscalculation. For she had placed her powers inside a former Jinchuriki. So when she replaced Kyubi, she had done so in the most literal sense possible. That meant her power was to be held back, kept in check and for use by none other than Uzumaki Naruto himself. A mere boy of 5 years old. So for the next 7 years she could only watch. Watch as he aged, becoming a prepubescent man while she did not change. Her chakra returned, but only enough to fill the body of the 5-year-old like container she was now trapped in. In a sense, it was enough. Even in her weakened state, she was far more powerful than most adults, with perhaps few exceptions. Despite this, it wasn't enough to break free from the shadow. Watching might not have been her only option, but when she considered the alternatives, it was the only thing she desired. What would she do if not watch? Speak with Uzumaki Naruto? No, she would not sully her voice by giving him the chance to hear it. After all, he was just a mere human. A thief like all the rest of them, who had stolen her chakra. She had nothing to gain from trying to communicate with him. It was these thoughts that Kaguya assumed she could hold onto. That she could somehow be an impartial juror long enough for something about her situation to change. This was her final miscalculation. For she had forgotten, but she was once a mother. Even in this 5-year-old body, those instincts did not disappear. She thought she had destroyed them long ago, when she had resolved herself to fight her own children. However, being in Naruto's shadow changed that, and watching him reminded her of all those things she thought she had discarded. This was the humanity's second mistake. That they would dare place all their anger, cowardice, and malice on the shoulders of one small boy ignorant of sin. He was blamed for the actions of the demon fox, a once malevolent creature given shape by chakra and for a time sealed inside him. The arrogance of man was thinking that meant the two were one and the same. That arrogance led them to acting out all of their ugliest desires and wills. Uzumaki Naruto was scorned, cursed, beaten, neglected, and hated with the weight of a full village. No matter where he turned, there was no salvation that could possibly be found. The ones who had promised to protect him had abandoned their posts. Those who didn't resent him merely watched from afar. And those who were ignorant of it chose to remain that way, because their ignorance was truly a form of bliss. He was in hell, all alone in the darkness with no one to help him. That was why Kaguya would wait no longer for something to change. Watching Naruto reminded her of many things. Of her children when they had been his age. Of herself when she had been scorned by the people of this new world she escaped to. Of her own desire to just be loved. Before she had even realized it, Kaguya's plan had changed. With it, so too did her fate. She was no longer the woman seeking to reclaim everything for herself. Instead, she would just settle for revenge. Against all those who sought to keep her imprisoned and those who would harm the master of her shadow. The time to enact that change was now. She would watch no longer from his shadow. That was because the last straw was here, Naruto laying on his side in some back alley. It was hardly poorly lit, orange lights dancing in from just off the main road. It was the height of the evening nightlife. Many people passed by the alley, their shadows coming and going as they hurried past without a care for what was happening inside. Even if they did know, not a single one of them would have stopped to help. That was just how they all were. Woohoo! A younger man yipped in joy, the toe of his boot drilling into the young Naruto's ribcage. The young blonde let out a cough, blood spraying from his mouth and staining the already garbage-filled pavement. This is great stress relief. I might just keep him as a punching bag. A second man cooed with laughter, stomping down on the downtrodden boy's calf with his heel. I've been waiting a long time for my crack at him, damn fox. The third and final man of the despicable trio was digging through the trash, searching for something. This will do. He finally seemed to decide, pulling out an old and rusted pipe from deep within the darkness of the garbage. Naruto could not have possibly seen what it was, but he heard the metallic clinks as the man tested it out against the brick walls. The sound was almost grating, echoing vibrantly inside the small alley and out into the street. Yet not a single person paid those noises any mind. No one was coming to save him from out there. Is this kid really training at the ninja academy? The first one asked again, continuing to kick and stomp at Naruto as he talked. He hasn't even tried fighting back. This is too easy. He knows he can't. The one brandishing the pipe crouched down, licking his teeth as he leered over the beaten blonde. Don'tcha ya little hellspawn. He then rose up to his full height, placing the tip of his foot down on Naruto's cheek. No one cares if we beat on you, but if you hit back, well, that's it for you. He raised the bar over his head, muscles tensing as he prepared to bring it down. That's far enough, Ōtsutsuki Kaguya demanded, her voice coming simultaneously from everywhere around them and yet nowhere at once. The three men spun around, looking for the source of this new voice. None of them saw her as she emerged. No, perhaps they had seen her, but it was impossible for their minds to understand what was really happening. That's how outside the realm of possibility Kaguya's first emergence was. The lights outside had cast the shadow of Naruto's prone form up against the nearby dumpster the metal pipe had just been dug out of. Floating up from that shadow now was Kaguya herself. Standing at even full height, she couldn't have been much more than 100 centimeters. Her long white hair was taller than she was, extending down and into the shadow, unable to come out completely. Atop her head was two horns, almost giving her the appearance of a rabbit. A Hyuga? One of the men asked, finally locating her. He was mistaken, of course. Kaguya was no Hyuga, one of the elite ninja clans located within the village. She was much older and far more ancient than that. Even so, he wasn't mistaken that she did share their Byakugan eyes. Before her imperfect resurrection she had a third eye, but that would not open. Not in this incomplete form. Just a brat, the man holding the pipe said, still positioning it above his head as if to swing it at any given moment. I don't know where you came from, kid, but get lost. This doesn't involve you. Run. The raspy voice of Naruto chimed in. He could barely see her, the skin around one of his eyes swollen shut. The other blue orb was partially pressed against the dirty alley pavement, tears slowly leaking out. Even so, he called out to her in an attempt to protect her. To not get her involved in this fight. In a situation like this, he would care about others more than himself. Which was precisely the problem and why Kaguya would deal with this right now. Thou concern is unneeded. Be silent while we eradicate these vermin. She spoke to Naruto and Naruto alone. To someone such as Kaguya, even the fact that humans as lowly as the others had heard her voice was in a way tainting it, as if somehow making her more impure for allowing them to interact on the same plane as she existed in. That didn't matter, for she was about to erase them anyways. What the hell was that, you bitch? 3 small thunks cut the man off before he could say anything more. None of them had realized it, but Kaguya had already prepared her attack while she was talking to Naruto. For her it was as simple as raising a single arm, pointing at them with her hand curved into the shape of a finger gun. Then from the tip of her finger, a gray bone had shot out, tearing through her own flesh as it did. She had done this 3 times in quick succession, all while the one man had taken a step forward to yell at her. That was the last thing any of them ever did. Before there was even time to scream, the little bullet she shot them with caused a chain reaction. They turned to ash, originating from the source of the bullet wound and expanding to the rest of their bodies in a matter of seconds. As they broke down, fear and brief terror flashed across their eyes, before those 2 dried out and disappeared, becoming nothing more than a gray pile of dust on the ground, awash in the orange light from the main street outside of the alley. What did you just do? Despite his injuries, Naruto attempted to jump to his feet. He failed, only to collapse back to the ground and land on his butt. As he tried to scurry backwards and away from Kaguya, his shadow shifted and danced in the light. Wait, still thyself. Kaguya called too late, his shadow falling away from the dumpster she stood atop of. The shifting shadow dragged her with it, sending her sprawling onto the dirty, garbage-filled street below. She hit the concrete with a loud thud, letting out a small groan of pain as she rolled over. Sorry, Naruto said. Despite the fear and confusion still racking his whole body, the slightly comical sight of the little girl falling from a dumpster was enough to calm his nerves. Although only temporarily, as he once more looked back at the piles of ash where his assailants had just been. Did you kill them? He asked, still unsure if that had truly been what had just happened. Not long before this, those 3 men had jumped him while he attempted to pass this very alley. They had struck him in the head first, dazing him and making him unable to react. The one man had been wrong earlier, when he assumed Naruto didn't fight back because he was afraid of higher retaliation from those in charge. The truth was, Naruto didn't give 2 shits about stuff like that. His opponents had just been adults that blindsided him and made it impossible to get a firm grip on what was happening until it was too late. That was all. Except now, they were dust. Lower thy voice, lest others learn of what we did. Kaguya urged, holding a hand up and glancing around the surrounding area with her Byakugan to be sure. It was fortunate for them that most people wanted to ignore Naruto, as it also meant they weren't going to check on the men she just murdered. So long as no one had seen the initial act, there would never be any proof of what had happened to them. They were as good as vanished. Not that Kaguya cared about such things as human laws or their fear of death, neither of which were things she was capable of understanding to begin with. All the same, it would be inconvenient for her if the master of the shadow she was bound to found himself incarcerated for charges of murder. Naruto yelled, suddenly pointing a finger at her in accusation. Don't lump me in this together with you. You did that by yourself, even if you were trying to save me. Thanks by the way, but don't act like I had anything to do with whatever you did just now. His voice was suddenly cut off, the pain from earlier returning as he got over his shock. His eye was still swollen and several ribs were cracked. Not to mention all the bruises and other internal bleeding he no doubt suffered from at the moment. Kaguya sighed. We doth not refer to thou and us. We use it only in direct reference to Kaguya as oneself. She picked herself up, slowly ambling over to him to inspect his injuries as she explained. You mean you refer to yourself in plural? Naruto asked, before then letting out a hiss of pain as Kaguya poked at his swollen eye with her sharp nail. Kaguya, was it? Kaguya-chan. Even sitting down on the ground and Naruto wasn't much shorter than her. Refer to us as thou please. Kaguya snapped, applying a slight juken touch to the wounded area around Naruto's face. It wasn't much, but the swelling was already subsiding as the wound mostly healed on its own. As Kaguya inspected his innards, she noticed even his cracked bones were beginning to mend themselves. Apparently a side effect of being linked directly to her, but his healing was extraordinary. There was one other thing she noticed, a sudden swelling of chakra in the palms of Naruto's hands. This is, she whispered in awe. What is this? Naruto asked, feeling the pulsating in his hands. He let out another hiss of pain, not sure what was happening. The palms of his hands ached in searing red-hot pain, as if his skin itself was being torn open. Which might have been an accurate description of what was happening. Because as he looked down at his hands, two purple eyes looked back up at him. Not just ordinary eyes, but eyes with a multitude of concentric circles. Rinnegan. Kaguya clarified. We see now, so that is what happened. She had always wondered what happened to the Rinnegan eyes that her shadow had stolen from Indra's reincarnate. The eyes had never manifested themselves in Naruto before now, despite the fact that they should have. It would appear the trauma from watching three men turn to ash in front of him had been the emotional trigger necessary to unlock them. As far as she could tell, it was an incomplete awakening. That was why they opened in his palms and not where they should have in the sockets attached to his brain. Incomplete summed up about every part of this botched resurrection, however, so it was no wonder this didn't go as it should either. If anything, this was the more expected outcome. I don't really get it, but is this gonna be okay? Naruto slowly turned his hands over, inspecting the back to make sure nothing was there. He then slowly curled in his fingers into fists, the Rinnegan eyes shutting themselves automatically as he did. When he unfurled his fingers, the eyes opened back up. Weird. He was at least handling the sudden appearance of them better than Kaguya would have hoped. Thou shall be fine, Kaguya assured him. She began to sink into the earth, merging once more with Naruto's shadow. For now, seeking nourishment would be wise. Sustenance will help thou heal. In mere moments she was gone. Wait, where the hell did you go? Naruto leapt to his feet, this time successfully and without once more collapsing to a heap on the street. He spun around in circles, looking for Kaguya but failing to catch any sight of her. Even if he could stand, the sudden twirling motion didn't sit well with his injured head and he nearly topped back over. An arm coming from his shadow in the wall caught him, holding him upright and preventing that. We are here, exactly where we have always been. Inside thy shadow. Her voice felt like it was echoing around inside Naruto's head, not coming from any kind of outside source at all. Which was probably the most accurate way to view how she was currently communicating with him. I still don't get it, but it sounds like you're gonna be with me for a while then. Is that right, Kaguya-chan? He took a couple uneasy steps forward and the arm that had been helping him stand once more retreated back into his shadow. Yes, that would be an accurate assessment. Kaguya agreed. From inside his shadow she could see as Naruto took another look back, glancing down at the ashes that had once been people. Did thou regret their deaths? She asked, unable to curb her own curiosity. Such fears truly were an enigma to her, and she couldn't help but wonder how Naruto could hold anything resembling affection towards those who had wished him harm. No. Naruto shook his head, surprising her by revealing the opposite instead was true. He looked down at one of the Rinnegan on the palm of his hand. It's weird, I always thought I would hate it, if someone that always cursed me died before I could make them change their mind. After you killed them though, I just felt relieved. Kind of like thank goodness, now I don't have to deal with their stupid cowardly bullshit anymore. Does that make me twisted? He asked, smiling sadly as he turned to his own shadow. We do not think so. Kaguya said simply. She had no idea what concepts a young human like Naruto might view as right and wrong. However, she did know one thing: if feeling remorse for the loss of those three was what modern humans considered to be proper, she would reshape their views starting from this moment. Naruto nodded in response. Slipping his hands in his pockets, he then walked out from the alley and left those three piles of ash behind. To him, they were gone now, both in the physical sense of the word and to him emotionally. He would offer their ashes no respect, nor would anyone else know they were ever there. Reduced to mere garbage to be swept up and thrown in the trash with everything in that dirty street. Just like that, the curtain peeled back as the first proper meeting between the two that would shape the entire ninja world unfolded. The cruel stage play had already begun. Yet no one had been there to witness it but the main actors themselves, Ōtsutsuki Kaguya and Uzumaki Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto stopped walking, turning to look at his shadow. It was the same as it always was, but now that he looked at it a little more closely, he realized there was something just a little off. To the average observer, his shadow wasn't unusual. However, now that Naruto was aware of it, he couldn't help but notice the slight difference. His shadow, it was darker than the shadows of everyone else around him. As if two shadows stacked on top of each other. It still wasn't much of a difference, but it was noticeable enough to him now that he couldn't help but wonder how it had never come up before. Or perhaps it was because he was now different. He couldn't resist the urge to pull one of his hands from his pockets, unclenching his fist to look down at the purple eye that gazed back up at him. The Rinnegan. That was what the girl in his shadow had called it. Move it, brat. Before Naruto could ponder much more on the issue, he was violently knocked aside as one of the passers-by roughly shoved him with their full body weight. The 12-year-old blonde was sent stumbling, nearly collapsing once more onto the dirt path. He only caught himself at the last second, but it wasn't without consequence. His calves burned, head swimming in pain, and it felt like one of his ribs had cracked yet again. This was the unfortunate truth of his circumstance. Having only just been saved from the worst beating of his life, he had yet to fully recover. Yet despite the obvious injuries and unclean state of his clothes, no one offered to help him. Why would they? Everyone hated him, with few exceptions, for reasons he did not yet even comprehend. You can hear me, can't you? Kaguya-chan. Which was why he didn't worry about being seen talking to his own shadow in public. No one paid attention to him anyways, and even if they did, they would just assume the worst of him. Probably figured he had finally lost his mind or something. Yes, we can hear. What is it thou wants? Kaguya finally gave up at ignoring him, a single Byakugan eye popping out from the darkness of his shadow to look up at him. Without a proper mouth materialized, her voice merely echoed inside Naruto's head, something only for him to hear. She truthfully didn't desire to speak to him at all. For her, it had been 7 long years that she existed inside of his shadow. Yet during those 7 years she had not spoken even once. It was as she had been afraid of, but now that Naruto knew of her presence, he desired to speak with her, regardless of time or place. Naruto shrugged at her question. Nothing in particular. Just making sure you're still there, I guess. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say he was just confirming that her earlier appearance in the alley hadn't been some fever dream. We are always here, Kaguya answered, simple as that. As if it was just a common fact for someone to live in another's shadow. That's so? Naruto asked, apparently satisfied to know he wasn't alone. He turned around and once again started limping forward. His destination wasn't far, but it had taken him time to even make it this far on his bad leg. He just hoped she had been right earlier and that eating would help him recover faster. Not like there was much point in going to the hospital, where they were likely to turn him away. Which was why he went to one of the only places he knew that wouldn't throw him out. Naruto-kun. The slightly older girl known as Ayame called in shock as the young blonde pushed back the flaps to enter his all-time favorite ramen stall. Are you okay? She asked, walking around from the back to better get a look at the state Naruto was in. I'm fine, Nei-chan. Naruto grinned at her, attempting to downplay the severity of his injuries to little success. There was no bluffing his way through this one. Just a little fight, which I totally won by the way. You should see what they look like right now. In a way, those words weren't a complete lie. Geez, Ayame huffed, bending down as she examined the still slightly puffed skin around his left eye. Well, it doesn't look too bad. She relented, although she wouldn't be able to say that if she had seen it not 10 minutes before this. Your clothes on the other hand, in the light of the shop, the true state of Naruto's orange jacket and pants was much more apparent than they had been under the pale moonlight. Exactly as Ayame noted, they were disgusting, covered in pieces of trash, dirt, blood, and possibly ash of the killed men. I guess this is pretty bad. Even Naruto couldn't deny it now that he got another look. Not seeing much choice, he unzipped the jacket and discarded it onto the floor next to a seat for the moment. Beneath the jacket was a black shirt, the symbol of Uzushiogakure marking the front and rear. Ayame, the master of the ramen stall, called for his daughter. See if we still got those shorts upstairs. They're probably a little big, but at least they'll be clean. His daughter immediately voiced her agreement, disappearing around the back of the shop as she went to get what her father asked. You don't gotta do that. Naruto tried to insist, but a shake of the head from the master silenced any protest. Well, if you say so. Thanks, Oji-san. I'll just have the usual, you know. Make it 2 of them, but a kid size for the second. As he placed his order, Naruto carefully inspected the seats. There were no other patrons at the moment, so he had free reign over any stool, but he seemed to be paying special attention to the way the light was cast over each seat while making his choice. That's rare for you to order yourself a kid's size. Ayame said as she returned, not moments after she left, the aforementioned shorts in hand. As previously noted, but they were indeed quite large, extending well past his knees when he pulled them up over his orange pants. Once they were on, he slipped the pants off from underneath. Then by tightening the strings on the inside of the seam, he just barely got them secure enough to stay up without slipping down. With that, he tossed the old articles in the trash, the orange attire unsalvageable as it was. It's not for me, Naruto clarified, grabbing his chosen seat after putting on the clean shorts. My new friend is going to join me. He did not notice the surprise on either face of the staff, nor did he feel Kaguya's own disbelief from within the shadow. Thou cannot seriously expect us to come out and dine with you. Kaguya realized now that Naruto had chosen a seat at the end, where the light would cast his shadow to the stool next to him. He truly did intend for her to come out and eat, and had apparently planned it from the beginning. You made a friend? Ayame asked, sounding at the same time doubtful yet conflictingly hopeful. Kaguya had observed Naruto for a long time now, and these two were perhaps the only exception to the rule in how Naruto was treated. While it was true there were those that didn't hold him in outright disdain, even the peers in Naruto's place of education were at best neutral towards him. So to hear he had finally made a friend, it was almost certainly a first. Although Kaguya wouldn't call herself a friend per se. Yep. Naruto nodded gleefully, his cracked lips splitting in a huge grin. Despite how painful it must have been for him to smile with his wounds, he didn't seem to mind. Here's the thing though, she's like, super shy. Naruto emphasized the last couple words for effect. So it would really save me if you two would just kinda turn around and prepare the ramen while I wave her in, you know. They did as asked, although the ramen master's daughter still didn't appear totally convinced. As they went about their work, Naruto winked exaggeratedly down at his shadow, patting on the stool next to him as if to tell her exactly where to come out. Kaguya considered just ignoring him. She really did. It wouldn't have been hard for her to do it either. She had technically been doing it for 7 years already, after all. So this didn't have to be any different than all those times. Yet in the end she couldn't do that. She had already made her choice. From the moment she had decided to emerge from the shadow for the first time, she had committed herself to getting more involved with his life from then on. Of course, she didn't expect that to develop in such a way as this, least of all not so quickly. That just went to show how much she had underestimated Uzumaki Naruto and the kind of person he was. She would admit, however, she didn't hate this part of him. Kaguya emerged from his shadow, already sitting down on the tall stool. At her current height, she doubted her ability to have been able to climb up here otherwise without the power of levitation which she was currently incapable of. Naruto smiled, legs swinging back and forth in unrestrained joy, no doubt taking some small pride in his victory at coaxing her out. This was also the first time he got to look at her under proper light, inspecting her from top to bottom as if studying an alien species. Which would have been an accurate description of her. Oh my! Ayame gave out an exclamation of surprise, turning around to see Kaguya there. Although Kaguya would admit she wasn't sure which was more shocking, the way she entered without making any sound or her seemingly alien-like appearance. Father! Look! Naruto actually brought in a friend. Then again, maybe it was neither of those things. How rude. I told you, didn't I? Naruto crossed his arms and huffed, but it was clear there wasn't any actual fire to his pout. It was all just for show. Yeah, Ayame knew this too, waving him off and instead focusing solely on their newest customer. So what's your name, little girl? She asked, just condescendingly enough that Kaguya considered turning her to ash next. It was lucky for her that Kaguya had a mountain of reasons not to do so right at this very moment. Instead, Kaguya reached over, tugging on Naruto's sleeve for his attention. Naruto asked, looking back and forth between them. For a second, Kaguya thought he wasn't going to catch on before the realization lit up in his eyes. Oh yeah, so this is Kaguya-chan. There was a slight pause. Like I said, she's a little shy. So don't worry if she doesn't speak much. Or at all. Kaguya-chan, huh? Ayame intertwined her fingers over her heart. What a wonderful name. I don't know how you and Naruto became friends, but please take good care of him, okay? She said, as if entrusting Kaguya with her actual little brother. Order up. Not much more could be said as the master placed 2 steaming bowls of ramen in front of them. And I'll tell you what, in honor of this special occasion of Naruto bringing in his first friend, it's honest tonight. Naruto let out a cheer at the announcement before going to clap his hands together in thanks for the food. He paused just shy, suddenly remembering the Rinnegan eyes on his palms. Still not used to the eyes and what he could do exactly without hurting them, he was noticeably conscious about the way he put his hands together and then the way he grabbed the chopsticks. As if he was afraid any wrong move might cause him to poke them out. Ayame noticed his weird movements, but said nothing of it as she no doubt just assumed it was another wound he was attempting to hide. The ramen master, however, appeared to realize more than he let on. At the very least, he had noticed the true severity of Naruto's injuries, unlike his daughter. Even still, he did not ask questions, nor did he pry. He simply did what was within his power, offering Naruto warm food and a temporary shelter. Nothing more, but considering his station it was enough. In respect of that, Kaguya decided she would do him the royal honor of sampling the small offering he had prepared for her. What kind of god would she be if she didn't respond to the people's tribute every once in a while, after all? Kaguya took her chopsticks, mimicking the standard customs she had just witnessed Naruto perform before she too began to study her food. It was truly different from her time, but she would say she did not dislike the smell of it. Slowly, and ever so carefully she lifted the steaming noodles from the broth. After blowing on the noodles to cool them a little, she finally inhaled her first bite. She savored the texture, enjoying the taste that was unlike anything she had experienced before. The heat spread from her mouth and then warmed her whole body. Truly, humankind was a disgusting and foul race, but she would admit it. They knew how to prepare food suitable for even the palate of a god. Good? Naruto asked, grinning at her. He had paused his own consumption, something she knew he rarely did if it wasn't already all devoured, all just so he could rub it in her face how delicious the ramen was. As if he had been telling her that all along. HMPH. Kaguya turned her nose up at him, but nevertheless she went in for a second helping only moments later, scooting her bowl to the side so she wouldn't have to look at him while she ate. Although she could do nothing about the slight blush, that was made only more apparent on her pale skin. Adorable. Ayame could contain it no longer, practically dancing around the entire back of the kitchen. It looked like at any moment she might fly over the top of the counter to tackle Kaguya in a hug. Where did you find such a cute little girl, Naruto? Again, Kaguya considered turning her to ash. And again, Ayame was saved. This time because Kaguya would acknowledge that even under a new world order, she would need to be kept around in order to continue serving more of this ramen. Things settled down after that, all conversation ceasing so the two customers could enjoy their meals while they were hot. For Kaguya's first meal in over 1,000 years, she would say it had been pretty good, all things considered. If this was what the common folk normally ate, she could only imagine what those at the top must be allowed to consume. Thanks for the food. Naruto finished first, despite having a far larger bowl than Kaguya. She wasn't far behind, eating perhaps the fastest she ever had, even when compared to how she ate as an adult. As Kaguya had suspected, but the rate of Naruto's recovery had increased dramatically after he started eating. She suspected his body naturally burned the calories, converting them into the power necessary for his natural healing attribute. Come again soon, alright. Ayame reached over and rubbed Naruto's head affectionately. That means you too, Kaguya-chan. She then turned, winking at the petite woman. Kaguya ignored her, jumping down from the stool, falling the rest of the way to the floor to land dexterously on her feet. Naruto called his goodbyes over his shoulder, slumping down next to her, keeping extra caution of where his shadow was at all times so he didn't accidentally knock her over again. Kaguya reached up with one of her tiny hands, wrapping her fingers around Naruto's left pinky and ring finger. The two of them pretended not to hear Ayame's swooning yell as they walked out from the shop together. Although once they were back out on the main street, it was hard for Kaguya to ignore the curious gaze Naruto had as he looked down at her. "Do not misunderstand," she whispered. "It would merely be inconvenient for us to walk otherwise." Her tiny legs did not exactly carry her anywhere quickly on their own, and holding onto Naruto helped her make sure they kept pace with one another so she didn't get pulled around needlessly by his shadow. "Okay," Naruto responded simply. He didn't make fun of her, nor did it seem like he had any intention to. Instead, he smiled warmly. It was perhaps one of the most genuine gestures of warmth she had ever seen him display, as they did not come easily to someone who was only ever given coldness their whole lives. With the only exception being the ramen behind them. He then nodded at the opposite end of the street. Kaguya followed his gaze, noticing a shop marked with two crossed kunai above the door. He explained after she found it, "They sell ninja gear and equipment. I was thinking of getting some gloves, to cover up these." He lifted his free hand, pointing the Rinnegan right at her. Kaguya nodded. "This is wise." She agreed. What she didn't think was wise, however, was her walking around in public with him. If it was just to the weapons shop, she would allow it though. When was the last time she stretched her legs? Not that her muscles experienced things such as atrophy like a human might have. So the two of them made their way across the street as quickly as possible. It wasn't easy, having to constantly dodge back and forth around the pedestrians walking past either way. That was without considering that several belligerents sought to run into Naruto purposefully upon noticing it was him, most of them diverting at only the last second when they realized he wasn't alone. In the end they made it without incident, and with the sound of a small bell the door to the weapon shop swung open. "Welko," the older clerk began to call out, stopping when he saw who it was. He eyed Naruto wearily, as if he was a thief here to rob him of everything he had and not a paying customer as intended. His gaze fell on her next and she returned his glare right back. Even in child form, not many could stand the heated stare of a Byakugan, and this man was no exception, quickly averting his eyes and returning to read some newspaper he had placed on the counter. Aside from him, there was no one else in the shop. They were the only customers right now, although Kaguya suspected it would remain that way if anyone had seen Naruto enter. Very few would willingly enter the same space as he was in, which meant his very presence was bad for business. This meant Naruto got thrown out of most shops immediately, so even being allowed in was a step up for him. Although it was unlikely his tolerance would be accepted for long. The man was already making troubled grunts as the two lingered by the entrance. Not that Naruto seemed to care, humming to himself as if to show he didn't even notice, only slowly meandering in as he took in all the sights. Kaguya couldn't help but smirk. Whether it was intentional and Naruto was just being vindictive or not, she couldn't help but enjoy the little display he was putting on. Regardless, she would feel more relaxed if she could take care of what they came here for. Naruto didn't realize it, but he was playing a dangerous game by not concealing her or the Rinnegan. This was her fault, as she had not yet stressed the importance of such things to him yet. No doubt there was a long conversation awaiting them tonight, when they were away from any prying eyes. Before making his way to the gloves, Naruto stopped in front of a glass case filled with a myriad of swords. So cool, Naruto admired them, looking in particular at a giant blade larger than he was tall. Such foolishness, Kaguya sneered, snapping him from his delusions. The minerals used to smelt that sword are of the lowest quality. Thy money would be much better spent on another blade. Kaguya had no kind of concept of modern money, but she imagined the long string of zeros at the end of the price tag did not signify affordability. Yeah, then what do you recommend? Naruto snapped back at her, voice challenging her to pick a better weapon. She saw no point in entertaining such a pointless game, as Naruto most certainly did not possess the funds to purchase even the cheapest of these swords. Still, she would not have the value of her eye questioned and so scanned over the assortment in the display case before her. Finally, she found it. This one, she said, pointing at a tanto, a short sword no bigger than Naruto's forearm, made of steel so pure it almost looked white. The hilt guard was the red spiral pattern of Uzushiogakure, and most impressive was the handle of the blade itself. The black leather concealed beneath it a complex array of seals designed to more easily channel chakra directly into the blade. Naruto wrinkled his nose in dissatisfaction. Couldn't you have picked something more romantic? I would just get made fun of for swinging one of these around. It's barely bigger than a kunai. His hyperbole was not lost on Kaguya. The blade was easily twice the length of one of the daggers Naruto was now referring to. Of course, it was all about relativity, and anything would seem short when compared to the impractical monstrosity Naruto wanted. If you're just gonna bad-mouth my swords, get lost, you damn brats. The old clerk must have heard them, shouting over the top of his newspaper without even looking in their direction. He had not even seen which sword Kaguya was pointing to. As she realized this, a sinister idea began to form in the back of her mind. She had not attempted something like it before, but she saw no reason why it shouldn't work. Especially if it was this sword. Alright already, geez. Naruto didn't even notice the evil grin that spread across Kaguya's face. Instead, he began to pull her along, his shadow falling over the sword they had just been looking at as they passed it by. It was at that moment Kaguya tested her theory, unbeknownst to anyone else. The two of them made it over to the gloves, which were located in the back of the store and out of sight from the clerk and his desk. 2,000 ryo for some gloves, so damn pricey, Naruto groaned despondently as he looked across the selection. We do not understand. Kaguya tilted her head. Unlike with swords, she did not see any measurable difference between one pair of gloves and the next. Are such things not considered a standard commodity? Should they not be provided for their warriors? When she had ruled, her military would not have to pay for things like this themselves. An army would not have functioned back then if they had been required to. Not exactly sure what you're talking about, but, Naruto rubbed the back of his head, still not entirely grasping the complexity of Kaguya's language. They don't just give these things away. And I don't make much of an allowance. Not until I graduate from the academy in about a month, at least. Humanity has grown complex since we've been sealed, it would appear. Kaguya rubbed her chin, still trying to clear her head of all her old assumptions. She had mistakenly believed that humanity was incapable of evolution, but it would seem they had developed all kinds of systems she had seen no need to understand until now. Of course, once she ruled again she could undo many of them. However, until then she was going to need to learn to play their silly games. What in the? There was a sudden loud commotion that interrupted their conversation, the store clerk storming over towards them with loud footfalls. Naruto's entire body bristled as if a wild animal, pupils dilating as the old man rounded the corner and stalked up to them. Where is it, you damn thief? He shouted, pointing a finger accusingly at the young blonde. I don't know what you're talking about. Naruto deadpanned, and it was the truth. Of course, just because it was the truth didn't mean he was going to be given the benefit of the doubt. Innocence meant nothing when the people had already decided you were guilty of a different crime. The sword. You stole the sword. A vein so large it looked like it might burst popped up atop the old man's head, his face a sweltering shade of red that was almost comical. In contrast to this, Naruto just looked at him dumbfounded, pulling at his pockets to show they were empty aside from his frog-shaped wallet. I don't have anything, do you, Kaguya-chan? Naruto asked, looking down at the shorter girl. She smiled, silently enjoying the exchange, as she lifted her sleeves to reveal nothing. Never mind the fact that she was so short it would ordinarily be impossible for her to hide anything, let alone a sword of any kind. You damn brat, I know it was you. The clerk appeared to have enough, hand reaching forward to grab Naruto by the mop of blonde hair on his head. He had no idea how close to death he just was. The smile on Kaguya's face disappeared immediately. Her arm was still lowered, but she had already curved her hand into the shape of a finger gun, index finger extended and thumb pointing up. Just as a small gray bone started to poke past her flesh, was the man saved from himself. That's far enough. The hand of a fourth person reached out from between them, grabbing the store owner by the wrist. One moment there had been no one there, the next he was. He was a tall man with gravity-defying white hair. Aside from that, there wasn't much more information to be said about this new presence. He wore standard Konohagakure no Sato ninja attire and his face was almost impossible to see, the lower half covered with a mask and his left eye hidden by a slanted Hittite. Despite his seemingly harmless appearance, however, he put Kaguya immediately on edge. She hadn't even sensed him come in the store, let alone see him move just now when he appeared before them. The man had no presence, as if just a scarecrow rather than a human. No, to say he had no presence wasn't entirely correct. There was a pressure there, one concealed in his hidden left eye. Kaguya had no idea what it was, but she didn't like it. Being seen at all by one of Konohagakure's military was bad for her. Even more so by one with some kind of perceptive eye. It was too late for such regrets now. So the only thing she could do was keep her jutsu ready. If she decided he posed a threat, she would just eliminate the both of them. No matter how skilled this man may be, no one could survive being hit by her jutsu. A ninja, the clerk couldn't decide between being shocked by the sudden appearance, remaining angry as before, or being relieved at the presence of an authority figure, so his words came out as some odd combination of all three. However, it quickly became apparent that he thought of this as beneficial to himself. Just in time, he growled, shaking his hand free to once again thrust an accusatory finger at Naruto. This brat stole one of my swords. The masked man blinked slowly, lazily even as he stared at the red-faced store clerk with something akin to pure nihilism. He then slowly turned his head, looking down at Naruto who simply folded his arms in defiance and glared back, as if daring him to do something. Finally, after several agonizing moments did the man speak again. Well, Naruto, he called the blonde by name, along with some sense of familiarity even. Is that true? He asked. I already said it isn't. Naruto stomped his foot, growing tired of going through this song and dance every time. Just because something bad happened when he was around didn't make him the problem. With that, the masked man shrugged. Well, seeing as how you don't seem to be holding any swords, I figured that had to be the case. He reasoned logically. You're going to take his side. Of course, this sense of logic didn't extend to the shop owner, spit flying from his mouth as he yelled now. Now, let's calm down. I'm not taking any sides here. The masked man said, holding up his hands to protect himself from the suddenly flying spittle. I'm just saying, isn't it possible you misplaced it? The very suggestion that the shop owner himself could somehow be the one at fault was the final straw for the old man. I want all three of ya outta here. He bellowed at the top of his lungs, loud enough to rattle the windows. For the masked man and Kaguya, that was only all too agreeable. However, Naruto still hadn't accomplished what he had come here to do in the first place. At least sell me these gloves first. Naruto ripped the first pair he could off the wall, holding them up. It's the least you can do after accusing me of shit I didn't even do. 4,000 ryo, hand it over right here in exact change. The man didn't even miss a beat, holding out the palm of his hand as if expecting Naruto to dump the contents of his wallet right there. Kaguya was almost surprised that he would accept any kind of transaction at all. Almost. That's double the price, you cheapskate. Naruto pointed at the price tag, indicating that they were marked at only 2,000. There's 2 gloves, aren't there? The man asked, as if Naruto was the stupid one for not understanding such a simple concept. Kaguya was ashamed to admit, but the logic didn't seem that insane to her. In any other situation, she might have believed that was the natural conclusion anyone would draw. This only reinforced to herself how dangerously naive she had become of the present times. I think that's enough here. Come on, Naruto. It wasn't until the masked man also seemed disgusted by the store owner's logic that Kaguya even realized the truth. A hand rested on Naruto's shoulder and started to guide him out, so Kaguya quickly took Naruto's fingers in her tiny hand again so as not to be separated from him. As all 3 of them exited quietly, Naruto looked up at the stranger, eyes asking for him why this newcomer had helped him just now. When anyone else would have just let it go, or worse have sided against him. His voice, however, asked a different question: who are you? Well, you can just call me Kakashi. The man said, seemingly having deliberated about even giving him that much information. It was hard to tell if that was even his real name, and it most definitely didn't explain his relationship to Naruto. Anyways, here, Kakashi, as he called himself, wasn't done helping them yet. He pulled off his gloves, standard shinobi issue going by their appearance, but they were certainly more expensive than the ones Naruto had been looking to buy just now. Naruto looked down at the gloves suspiciously as they were thrust towards him, nose wrinkling as if he smelled something foul. You're just going to give them to me? He asked. His suspicion wasn't unwarranted. Not only was this man helping him, but now offering his gloves free of charge. The man looked up at the moonlit sky as he considered how best to answer. Think of it as an apology. He finally said, although what he was apologizing for was a mystery. It had been him that helped them out. Even though he had no reason for the kindness that they knew of. Well, if you say so. Naruto hesitantly reached forward, taking the gloves without any kind of resistance. He had half expected the man to snatch them away just before he could and yell out it had been a prank. Even as Naruto slipped them on, he still didn't rule out the possibility the man would turn on them, accuse Naruto of stealing the gloves like he had just been accused of stealing the sword. Instead, the man bent down as he turned his attention now to Kaguya. And what about you, Ojo-chan? How do you know Naruto? He did not ask her for her name, but she would not have given it to him anyways. However, asking her relationship to Naruto was in a way a good opportunity for her. She had been waiting to make the status of their relationship clear until now. He is our Uruji, she proclaimed clearly and proudly, placing her hands on her hips as she did so. Despite claiming him as her lord and master just now, it was actually more accurate to say he was the master of the shadow she inhabited. So he was not her own master by direct connection, but it was otherwise the simplest way to term their relationship to one another. There was a pregnant pause, neither Naruto nor Kakashi knowing how to react right away. What Kaguya did not expect, however, was the man to start chuckling, one eye closing in a smile as he reached forward and rubbed her head. Is that so? Good for him, he said, before then standing back to his full height and nodding once more at them. Be seeing you around, maybe. Try to stay out of trouble until then, if you can. With that, he turned around and started to walk away. Ah, thanks. Naruto called after him before it was too late, not even sure his voice reached the fading back of the mysterious man. An over-the-shoulder wave signaled it had, and a moment later he disappeared into the crowd. So what now? Naruto asked, inspecting the new gloves that covered his hands. With his Rinnegan finally hidden, they had one less thing to worry about. We shall go out into the forest, Kaguya said, pulling at Naruto's hand to get him to move. Thou require some instruction, and we imagine thou also have questions. For now, she just wanted to get him away from the crowds. There were too many potential problems out in public. Finally, some answers. Naruto nodded, allowing himself to be guided along by Kaguya the first couple steps before taking the lead. It would be up to him to take them to a remote spot where they couldn't be bothered. He knew of a couple places, naturally. Someone as hated as he was needed a place to escape to once in a while. After that blow up in the shop too, he felt the need to get away too. What was that even all about anyways? Did someone actually steal a sword? He wondered aloud, not expecting an actual answer to that particular question. We did not steal, Kaguya insisted, surprising him when she lifted her sleeve once again. From the darkness inside, the tip of the hilt came out. Everything in this world originally belonged to us. So this sword is our right. She explained simply, completely missing his look of shock. How? When? Naruto wanted to be angry at her. That whole mess could have been avoided if she had done nothing and just left the sword alone. When he thought about that store clerk though and how he tried to charge him double for the gloves, he couldn't bring himself to think that Kaguya had done anything wrong. In fact, they deserved that sword. For all the things he had been cheated out of in his life, it was about damn time he finally took something back. We told thou, this is a fine blade, Kaguya stated as if that answered his question. It channels one's chakra affinity and ours is yin itself. Pulling it into thy shadow was hardly any effort. It would be more accurate to say the blade fell in of its own accord. She finished her explanation, but Naruto still didn't really understand. He decided to leave it for now, as he could always ask her later to explain it with everything else. I think, Naruto started to say, squeezing Kaguya's hand a little more tightly as they walked. I'm really glad that you finally came out of my shadow. He had always felt like there was something there, but had also always assumed it was his imagination. Just some dark fantasy. Then when she had finally come out, he had been terrified. Mortified as she murdered 3 people in front of him. Not because she had murdered them, but because of how effortlessly she had done it. It was that same effortlessness with which she took something that didn't belong to her, yet was able to claim with confidence afterwards that it had always been hers. To have such confidence to go against everything he thought was normal up until now, it invigorated him. Filled him with the will to also want to change and somehow become like that. She may have called him her master, but he now felt it should be the other way around. These kinds of sentiments were a first for Kaguya, but she could not say she disliked it. To have someone voice happiness at the thought of being with her wasn't a bad feeling at all. Yes, we are somewhat happy too. Kaguya responded by squeezing Naruto's hand back, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. Human warmth, which she hadn't felt in over 1,000 years. Kaguya hated the moon, how could she not? For her, it had been nothing more than a millennium-long prison. Yet even she could not deny its beauty. And never had she seen it as clearly as she did tonight. That was because before now she only had the opportunity to view it from within Naruto's shadow. Even as he slept, rolling over in his bed, she did not leave his shadow for even a moment. Just merely gazing up at the moon those nights from within it. As if looking at her former prison from within her new one. Naruto had realized this earlier, but his shadow was a little special. Not just because she resided in it, but because her will had merged its shadow with his. This meant even in the darkest of nights, he would still have a shadow. Let alone a night like tonight with a full moon. Now she walked beside Naruto, hand in hand, as they slowly made their way deeper and deeper into one of the numerous forests from which Konohagakure had received its name. The light of the moon was a blessing, casting a wider shadow so she could move somewhat more freely. Not that she took advantage of this, preferring to cling as closely to Naruto as physically possible for the moment. The two of them came into a wide clearing with several large boulders scattered about. It would appear it was a proper training ground of some sorts, the rocks covered in numerous scars no doubt caused from ninja blades. Of course, no one was here at this time of night, making it perfect for them now. This will do. Kaguya nodded in respect to Naruto. He had been the one leading them here, after all, so it had been his good sense to choose this place. She had been aware that he knew his way around the forests, but to be this informed to even know such an excellent area, she had underestimated him yet again. Really? That's a relief. Naruto chuckled happily, just glad to have been able to pick a place to her liking. He didn't really know her much yet, but she seemed like the hard-to-please type of person. He also had no idea how right about that he was. Now wasn't the time to get to know her, however, now was finally the time for him to get some answers. He let go of Kaguya's hand to pull off the gloves that the mysterious Kakashi person had given to him earlier, once again exposing the purple eyes full of concentric circles on the palms of either hand. First of all, you know what these are? He asked, pointing the eyes in her direction. Rinnegan. Kaguya said again, taking several steps away from him. His shadow stretched only 3 short meters, which was all the distance she could get from him now. Yes, we know what they are. She didn't bother looking at the eyes, instead looking back up at the moon. It had been the power of those eyes that sealed her there in the first place, after all. So, what are they then? Naruto encouraged her to continue, eager to get to the bottom of these sudden new eyes. For him, who knew nothing of the 3 great dojutsu, or any of the forgotten history, Kaguya was at a loss for how to properly explain. For starters, it was unlikely Naruto had ever even heard the title of her son, Rakudo Sennin, or his numerous accomplishments. Even the religion he had founded, Ninshu, had been perverted and twisted into ninjutsu. It was no longer a power to connect others as he intended, but now just a power to strengthen oneself. Never mind her son's teachings, however, it was the power of his eyes that were important to this matter. He was called Rakudo Sennin in the legends because his Rinnegan had granted him access to 6 unique abilities, paths as he referred to them as. However, Kaguya was unable to sense the connection to these numerous paths in the eyes that awakened in Naruto. That was perhaps inevitable. Like her resurrection, the Rinnegan awakening had been the result of an imperfect procedure. As the Rinnegan currently were, Kaguya was reminded more of a being known as Momoshiki, from her own clan, rather than her son. Of course, explaining her true nature would be even more difficult and unbelievable a story, but trying to start from the Rakudo Sennin would possibly give Naruto a false impression. Make him think he was capable of more than he ever would be. This wasn't to say Naruto didn't already hold incredible power in those hands. So long as he learned to harness their power, he would gain incredible strength unlike anything he thought imaginable. He would be more perfect than he imagined himself in his dreams. In fact, depending on the path he had access to, he might even be capable of miracles above her son. A jack of all trades is a master of none. Despite the leagues of devoted followers who would call him their master and for all his miraculous achievements, Rakudo Sennin had never reached the end of any one path. Of course he hadn't. It would be impossible with the way he had continued with his life, attempting to simultaneously walk 6 individual paths all at once. For Naruto, reaching the end of one path might be possible, so long as he devoted himself to it and followed Kaguya's guidance, that is. Of course, the first step was understanding that he stood at the start of the path at all. Something he would never figure out if Kaguya didn't start explaining to him the nature of things. All thou need to know about the Rinnegan is one thing. Kaguya decided that instead of explaining the history of the eyes, she would at least tell him the concept upon which they operated under. Under the right circumstances they will awaken in a host, and through coincidence those circumstances gathered within thou and the Rinnegan appeared. Only it hadn't been entirely a coincidence. Perhaps a reincarnation of Asura being born the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was, but everything after was a deliberate act. Yeah, I don't really get all the complicated stuff, you know. Point is, I get some kind of cool power from this, right? Naruto asked, turning the eyes up to look at them for himself. If he was being honest, having eyes in his hands felt kind of disgusting, but if he got to do cool stuff with them, that was good enough for him. Kaguya sighed, not knowing why she had just bothered. Of course, she realized now. Naruto didn't care about the history or where the eyes came from. The only thing he wanted to know was what kind of new power he had. In a way, that made things easier for her, but she did wish he would take knowledge a little more seriously. Yes, that much is certainly not mistaken. Kaguya said. She decided for now to humor him, as she would not deny that she was also curious what power he would manifest. Once thou make those eyes thy own, that is. The truth was exactly as she said. Naruto's Rinnegan weren't truly his own just yet. He had awakened the eyes, yes, but they were in a way still dormant. That much was obvious because he had yet to be able to see out of them. In addition to this, she could only sense Indra's chakra coming from the Rinnegan. What the heck does that mean? Naruto tilted his head. How can they not be mine? They're in my hands. And if they're not mine, how do I use them? It was too many questions all at once for Kaguya to answer, so she decided to not even bother. Instead, she would just solve the core issue. Rather, she would have him do it for himself. Hold out thy hands like this. Kaguya spread her arms wide, palms facing upwards, in a way that looked as if she was praying to the heavens. Naruto did as she instructed, mimicking her movements. This shall perhaps be more easy if thou close thy eyes. Naruto nodded, doing as told and slowly closing off his blue eyes. Kaguya and the world around him disappeared as he was thrust into darkness. Kaguya called out further instructions a moment later, reassuring him that he wasn't alone, the same as preparing any jutsu, weave chakra into thy hands. That should be enough to complete thy connection to the Rinnegan. He had been expecting a much more complex ritual of some sorts, but it seemed to be as easy as that. Not that he was going to complain. He had never been good at the complicated stuff, or creating clones, but even he could unleash his chakra when he had to. Chakra flared up from deep within his stomach, swirling around and then spreading to the rest of his body. He could feel the power surging down his legs and into his arms. It raced into his palms and there was a sudden pulse of energy. Unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was like ripples on the water, only it was his skin experiencing this instead. Then he could see. The full moon was shining down at him and he was looking right up at it. That didn't make sense though. His neck was still slightly inclined from having to look down at the much shorter Kaguya. Yet somehow he was looking up at the moon right now anyways. Turn thy palms towards us. Kaguya instructed. Naruto didn't really get it but did as was told. As he moved his hands, the image he was seeing changed. Until as he started to reach forward and Kaguya came into view. This is, Naruto gasped. Am I seeing with my hands? The knowing smirk Kaguya gave was all the answer he needed. Even then Naruto couldn't believe it, letting out an ecstatic laugh as he turned his hands in opposite directions. His very vision split, as if looking at two separate images simultaneously. Whoa, the sudden sensory upload was so unlike anything he had ever experienced before that there was a sudden spike of pain in his head and a wave of vertigo. He grit his teeth, Rinnegan eyes flinching shut as he fell to his knees. Do no fret, Kaguya said, her voice unconcerned, as she took a couple steps towards him. While on his knees, the two were near the same height, so it was easier for her to reach forward, taking his cheeks in her hands and stroking his face comfortingly. Thou shalt adapt to thy new sight quickly. The first time is always the most difficult. His blue eyes shot open, surprised by her sudden proximity. Although he could say he didn't mind the touch, enjoying the sensation of someone holding him in any way a foreign, but not unwelcome concept. That was wild. Naruto grinned through the piercing headache. So these eyes are mine now, right? Kaguya indicated for him to look down, see for thyself. She said. What he saw when he did was perhaps the last thing he had expected. His Rinnegan eyes were now a vibrant yellow that seemed to cast their own light, like two miniature suns. No longer were they the dull lifeless purple that they had originally awoken as. He didn't dislike the old color, but this new one certainly felt more like himself. Be assured, they are thy Rinnegan. Unique to thou now. Kaguya took a step back as she turned to face one of the numerous boulders. Aim thy dominant hand at that boulder. It is time to confirm thy path. Finally, Naruto stumbled back to his feet, holding his right arm out in front of himself, palm open. He gripped his forearm with his left hand and again began to channel chakra. As before, vision from the right eye flooded in and this time formed an image on top of what his blue eyes were also viewing. It was still an unusual and kind of a nauseating sensation, but it didn't cause a sense of imbalance or pain like before. What now? He wondered aloud, as just pointing the eye somewhere didn't seem to be doing anything. The same as when thou perform any jutsu. Kaguya said. This time, instead of simply weaving chakra in preparation for the jutsu, unleash the chakra and the jutsu should activate automatically. Like this. Naruto had no idea what he was expecting, but he did as instructed and pumped chakra once more into his right palm before discharging it all at once. At first, it seemed like nothing was going to happen, but then they both felt the change. As if gravity was suddenly pressing in on them from the side. The boulder Naruto was pointing his palm at was ripped from the ground, being dragged forward by some invisible force and came flying at them with the speed of a thrown kunai. Holy shit! Naruto yelled in a panic, glancing at Kaguya as if to ask what to do. Only she was no longer there. Kaguya had already dropped into his shadow, disappearing completely in order to avoid the incoming rock. Naruto didn't have such luxury and had to dive to the side, tucking into a roll to just barely dodge the boulder 3 times his side as it flew past. It carried on unhindered into the forest until it hit a tree, shattering bark and gouging a path through the earth as it continued its destructive path. Several trees were sent toppling to the forest floor, making a ruckus so loud that birds and other wildlife were sent fleeing in all directions, their screams and animistic cries only further adding to the discord. This cacophony of noise and chaos went on for several more agonizing seconds, Naruto having tucked himself into the ground face first, hands covering his head and butt in the air as he just waited for it all to end, hoping none of the trees fell on him. Finally, silence once again reigned. Aside from the distant cry of upset birds now circling the skies, Naruto was only able to hear his own ragged breathing. He slowly lowered his hands, lifting his head to turn around and view the destruction he had just caused. At least half a dozen trees were down, the boulder having carved a clear path through anything that had been in its way, which had almost also included him. That was awesome. Naruto couldn't even shout, just uttering his exclamation breathlessly. He looked down once again at his Rinnegan eye, not able to comprehend that it had been his own power just now that had caused what just happened. That was the Bansho Tenon. Kaguya corrected, reappearing from his shadow with her arms folded and a satisfied smirk. As we already suspected, but thou walk the path of heaven itself, Tendo. Her words were haughty and yet full of pride. Naruto had no idea what she was talking about, but it would appear she too had been pleased by his power just now. It was kind of dangerous though. Naruto chuckled awkwardly, stumbling to his feet as he better inspected the damage just caused. I'm not gonna have to dodge my own attack every time, right? Thou shall learn control, Kaguya assured him, glancing over to his left hand now. We already have a general idea of thy power, but for posterity, we should assess the capabilities of thy non-dominant hand. Right-o. Naruto wasn't about to complain, turning to a different boulder and this time raising his left hand to point at it. Just to be safe, he tensed his leg muscles, ready to dive out of the way at a moment's notice. Channeling chakra into his palm again, he unleashed another attack. This time, instead of gravity running towards them, it was as if it was being pushed away. The boulder was blasted backwards with enough force to send it airborne. It didn't make it far before smashing into another rock of equal size, the two hunks of stone shattering apart upon collision and sending shrapnel whizzing past in every direction. Naruto was at a loss for words, arms dropping down to his sides as he stared mouth agape at the sheer destruction he was capable of with just a single point and small discharge of chakra. This morning when he woke up, he couldn't have fathomed having this kind of power for himself. Yet now it was his reality. Shinra Tensei. Kaguya stated the name of the ability demonstrated just now. In thy right is the power of attraction and in thy left is repulsive force. Truly the dominion of heaven itself. As she talked, Naruto glanced down at her. She seemed to be in a good mood, throwing back her long white hair with one hand as she went to place both fists on her hips. You suspected this? Naruto asked, recalling what she said just after he used the first technique he didn't quite remember the name of. Why would you think I would develop this power in particular? He knew nothing about paths or how many of them there might be, but she hadn't seemed surprised that out of all of them he would get this one and had even been ready when the boulder initially came flying in their direction. We just said it, but Tendo is power over attracting and repelling forces. There was a slight pause, but when it was apparent Naruto still didn't understand, she elaborated further. In more simple terms, opposites. The same principle in which a Neo governs over. A Neo? Naruto asked, having a vague idea like he had heard the word before but being unable to place it. Separately, thou might know it as yin and yang. A Neo is the culmination of those two sides into one whole. Kaguya explained. As for why we suspected it, she held up her arm and from the darkness of her sleeve the tanto she had earlier stolen appeared. She grabbed it by the hilt and pulled the blade free. For one such as thou, showing might be easier than just hearing an explanation. Kaguya channeled chakra into the sword and then held it over her head. We said it earlier, but this is a fine blade. Able to channel one's chakra and incorporate it into their attack. Observe. As she swung it down, the blade made a black streak through the air, the tip of the blade unleashing her chakra in a dark, shadowy slash. We have a yin-type chakra affinity, as thou can see. At her full power, she would have actually had both a Neo and all the other primary chakra elements as part of her nature. Yet her imperfect resurrection had left her with only yin. Her shadow hadn't realized it, but it had unintentionally only pulled the yin chakra of the other 8 biju when extracting a sliver of their essence. It was, however, this unintentional mistake that ended up in a serendipitous merger. She tossed the blade to Naruto, who only barely managed to catch it by the hilt. Channel thy chakra into the blade and swing it as we did. She didn't wait for him to ask any questions, and Naruto, for his part, quietly did as he was told. When he swung the blade down, in contrast to the black, shadowy chakra of Kaguya's strike, the blade now emitted a force of pure white. Thy chakra affinity is yang. At least, it became as such when thou became our Jinchuriki host. She had no doubt that Naruto had probably been born with a different type of affinity. More than likely one of the 5 elemental natures most humans possessed. However, that had changed when her shadow had merged all of the things it had gathered with his chakra. Indra's eyes, slices of yin chakra from 8 biju, and the nature of a shadow itself being darkness had almost created an imbalance of dark energy inside Naruto. Had that imbalance remained as it was unlikely he would have survived the merger and everything would have been for naught. This was why she described it as a stroke of serendipity. The Yondaime Hokage had sealed only the yang half of Kyuubi's chakra in Naruto, and Asura's chakra also consisted primarily of yang energy itself. These things served as a counterweight, balancing the scales and allowing her incomplete resurrection to work at all. In the process they both lost their original affinity, but emerged with a new one, yang for Naruto and yin for Kaguya. Together they were the perfect representation of a Neo. Jinchuriki. Naruto asked now. Unlike with a Neo, where he had at least a vague idea of its concept, he was confident he had never heard that word before now. Yet he didn't like the sound of it, getting the sense the word was somehow dirty and even saying it was slanderous. That is right, Kaguya realized. Thou do not know. Their time together so far may have been brief, but Naruto had not once asked about Kaguya's origins, despite having numerous opportunities to. She already knew why. To Naruto, it didn't matter where she came from. He was just happy to have someone to talk to. Someone that would be by his side. No, that was forced into being by his side. Even if Kaguya had come out to tell him she hated him, Naruto would have tried to befriend her. Because he would have known she could not go anywhere. They were stuck together, and to Naruto, that made her the closest connection he ever had. What don't I know? Naruto pressed, concern and fear filling his voice and causing it to crack. While he may have been content not knowing Kaguya's origins before, he couldn't ignore it any longer. That was because he had unknowingly received some kind of title. The title of a Jinchuriki. Naruto may not have had any proof, but he knew it deep in his gut. That word was the reason for his misery up until now. For all the hate he had endured up until now. So he had to know what it meant, no matter how much that might hurt him. We suppose it can't be helped. Kaguya sighed. We shall tell you. If she was being honest, she did not want to divulge this information to him. Partially because it was mostly irrelevant now. No, it was wrong to say it was irrelevant. It was just that the circumstances of Naruto's condition had changed. However, because no one else actually knew about this change in circumstance, it was as if nothing had ever really changed at all. The truth became a lie, but no one knew that. So in the end, wasn't the reality in some way that it was still the truth? On the day of thy birth, thou became the Jinchuriki host of the Kyuubi no Yoko. There was a moment's pause following her revelation where she wondered if he would understand what that meant. What she didn't expect were the sudden tears that rolled down Naruto's cheeks. Unlike normal tears, these ones were cold and silent. He was probably not even aware of them himself. So he asked, voice hoarse and dry. I am the demon fox that attacked the village. That's why everyone hates me. That's why they're always so mean to me and won't let me play with the other kids. He collapsed to his knees, the sword he had been holding falling from his grip and clattering to the ground at his feet. No, that is not right. Kaguya walked up to him, taking his head in her arms and pulling him up against her shoulder, burying his face in her long white hair. She was reminded of how she used to comfort her own sons when they had hurt themselves. Only this wound was far more deep than anything they had ever experienced. Thou were merely its jailer. Of course, humanity is too ignorant to separate the two, so perhaps to them it is as thou say. Even she couldn't deny his words completely. No matter how much she wanted to. You keep talking about it like it's the past, but what does that mean? Naruto's hand slowly came back up, returning Kaguya's embrace and pulling her tight against him. He let out a choked sob, the tears flowing more freely now, yet somehow he also felt strangely comforted. Perhaps because he wasn't alone. He finally had someone that would look him in the eyes and tell the truth, no matter how hard that was for him. We already said. Thou are our Jinchuriki host now. Kyubi no Yoko is gone. She began stroking his hair, gazing out over the boulders he had just destroyed with his power not long before. Even with the power of heaven now in his hands, she was reminded that he was still a vulnerable boy. You mean like, you ate it, or something? Naruto asked, somehow finding the strength to chuckle through his forced sobs. Just the idea of Kaguya coming into his shadow to eat the fox was enough to be funny even in this circumstance. However, as it was, he could no longer ignore the obvious question. So he asked, what even are you? We suppose it was only a matter of time before that question. Kaguya gazed up at the moon, debating how much to answer. Although, she supposed mixing in a bit of the truth into a fairy tale didn't sound too bad. Thou can just think of us as a moon rabbit that came down to earth to eat demons. Then we made a mistake and lost our own shadow, binding us to thou. Quote. Even if it was a mistake, I'm glad you're here now. Naruto smiled, giving one last ragged breath as he finally calmed down and pulled away. Sitting on his knees was uncomfortable, so he shifted himself slightly, ending up in a cross-legged position on the forest floor. Kaguya turned herself over, pressing the little of her back into his chest and resting her head just below his chin. Together, the two sat for a while in silence. You know, I just thought of something, Naruto said, looking down at his yellow Rinnegan eyes again. They were facing up, looking at Kaguya from below, but he slowly started to turn them inwards as if to face them against one another. You talked about a Neo and all that stuff earlier, so if I used them at the same time, wouldn't I create some even more crazy powerful jutsu than those last two? Kaguya realized what he was intending to do just in time, reaching down and grabbing both his wrists to prevent him from doing exactly what he was just thinking. We would advise against that, she warned. Even as just a test, there was a slight pause, as she turned once more to look at the object of her former imprisonment. Thou would destroy Konohagakure no Sato, she said, gazing up at the full moon. That was what Kaguya had said, but Naruto could hardly bring himself to believe it. After all, there was no way he was suddenly that powerful. Certainly, what he had been able to do pushing and pulling large boulders was already pretty amazing, but not nearly on the same level as being able to wipe out a village. The worst part though, was that he considered testing it out anyways. What had the village ever done for him? Nothing except cause him pain and anguish. Even then, he had never actually believed that he wanted to destroy it. Yet for that brief moment after learning he probably could, the temptation had been there. It was gone almost as fast as it had come. However, the fact that he had even for a split second considered it, that terrified Naruto. So much so that it had kept him awake nearly all night. Just when he had finally started nodding off to sleep and his alarm clock had gone off, having been set to wake him up in time to make it to the academy. He considered skipping school for today. What was even the point? It's not like they were going to be able to teach him to control his new powers. Kaguya had been pretty clear that he had to keep his Rinnegan eyes a secret for the time being as well. Apparently they were pretty famous eyes or something, although it seemed kind of like they came from a vague point in history, making them more of a legend than anything people truly believed in. So he didn't see the big deal in showing them off. Kaguya was the one saying it, however, so he would respect her wishes for the time being. She was his first real friend, after all. So he wasn't about to run the risk of screwing that up so soon after finally getting her to come out of his shadow. That said, but he couldn't afford to skip classes either, least of all this close to finally graduating. So against all odds, he managed to drag himself from bed and haul himself off to the academy. This time Kaguya didn't come out from his shadow, preferring to hide inside it as she had always done up until last night. While Naruto would have liked her to come out, even he knew she couldn't just walk into class with him. So he went to school much like he always did, alone. Entering the classroom moments before the bell rang, Naruto let out a loud yawn. "Hey, Uzumaki," his homeroom teacher, a chunin known as Mizuki, warned him with a sneer. Whether it was about his near tardiness or clear lack of sleep, Naruto didn't care and promptly ignored him, taking the stairs up to the back of the class where he planned to resume his nap. "What's with the new get-up, Naruto? Some fatty dye and you take this clothes?" one of the students called, noticing the new white shorts several sizes too big. A chorus of guffaws and laughter rang out from the class, several others conspicuously pointing at him as he walked by. "Shut your stupid mouth, Kiba," Naruto growled, not even turning to look at the one who made the snide remark. One of the biggest bullies in his class and the apparent heir to the Inuzuka clan as the eldest son, Inuzuka Kiba, was an arrogant loudmouth with the fighting prowess to back it up. His beast-like movements made him number 2 in terms of their class spars, only one other able to best him. Naruto, for the record, was the dead last. Meaning he had never won a single round against anyone to date. With only about a month left now too. So yeah, he really wanted to unleash the power of his Rinnegan eyes. If only to see the look on Kiba's face as he was sent flying. Finally reaching the back of the classroom, Naruto plopped down at his unusual spot between the two people he could say he got along with best in the class. Of course, to get along with was mostly a relative term in this regard. Neither of them were someone he could call a friend. For that matter, they never even really talked at all. Which was the way he preferred it. Nara Shikamaru was to his left, already dozing away just as Naruto planned to do. Possibly the closest thing Naruto had to a friend, Shikamaru never made fun of Naruto, but mostly because he was just too lazy to be bothered. Knowing him, he would say it was a pain to get involved. So while he never stuck up for him, he never joined in on the others' teasing either. Haruno Sakura was to his right and was the complete opposite of Shikamaru. Her nose was already buried in some textbook, preparing for today's lesson. If Naruto was the most hated boy in class, then she was the most hated among the girls. Unlike him, she was also the top student in the whole school academically speaking, which was the main source of the scorn she received from all the others. As a fellow victim of bullying, she left Naruto alone, provided he didn't try talking to her. The moment he did, and it was likely a swift uppercut to the jaw. Together, the three of them would collectively be known as the unsociables among the rest of the students. Despite the shared name, this didn't make them a group of any kind. They were just three separate individuals that preferred to be alone. Well, maybe in Shikamaru's case this was actually true. It wasn't like Naruto himself wanted to be this way. He wanted to have friends and hang out with the others like a normal kid. It was just impossible for him. Now he finally knew why. Kaguya had told him about how he used to be the Kyuubi Jinchuriki and how most of the adults mistakenly believed this meant he was the demon fox incarnate. This misconception led many of them to hate him and subsequently warn their children to stay away from him. So all the kids, including the vast majority of his class, had inherited that hate. In the past, Naruto had tried to imitate what the other popular kids, like Kiba, would do. So he would be loud, mess up on purpose or do pranks in order to get attention. At first that had worked, but soon the parents had told their kids to ignore him, and so he once again became isolated. After that, he gave up trying to make friends at all, and that was how he ended up as the third member of the Unsociables. All right, class. Mizuki clapped his hands twice, getting everyone's attention. Now that all of us are here, he gave Naruto a dirty look as he emphasized who specifically they had been waiting for. Naruto rolled his eyes and put his head down, not caring to bother with someone else that apparently only saw him as some demon fox. Let's go over what we'll be doing today. I told you all last Friday before we broke for the weekend, but does anyone remember that can tell me what that was? Sakura closed her textbook, leaning forward on her desk to give her full attention forward. It used to be she would sit in the front of the classroom. Back when she had friends. After she had foolishly declared a crush on the top overall student in the class, however, she lost any mutual friends she once had and instead made only rivals. From then on, sitting in the front was a nightmare, leaving her back vulnerable to all kinds of pranks. Which is how she ended up back here, stuck with the two who were already entering the land of dreams. No one in front put their arm up to answer Mizuki's question, so seeing no other choice she decided to raise her own hand. Yes, Sakura. He called on her. As Sakura stood to answer, several snickers from the other girls around the class reached her ears. She didn't pay them any attention, lifting her chin high as she proudly recited the information no one else seemed to know, or at the very least didn't care enough to say. Today we will be discussing the history of the Hokage. Starting from the Shodai, who helped found the village, up to the current. She said, projecting her voice with as much confidence as she could muster. Having given her answer, she brushed back several strands of her long pink hair as she retook her seat. Very good. Mizuki nodded, turning to write the word Hokage up on the board. Most of you will be graduating next month, provided you pass the final exams. Once you do, you'll be official genin. That means real shinobi of Konohagakure no Sato. He pointed at the Hittite with the curved leaf symbol carved into it on his forehead. When you put this on, your life is no longer just your own. It is the express property of the Hokage. You will give your life for him, and for the village. Does everyone understand that, sir? Yes, sir. A chorus of cries from nearly every single student called out in unison. Sakura's voice, of course, joined in with them. The only two who didn't were the two idiots next to her fast asleep. Excellent. Mizuki grinned in satisfaction, not even paying attention to Naruto or Shikamaru. He had long given up on either of them, it would seem. Now then, he continued. It was the plan today to jump right into the books, but instead we will begin by introducing a special visitor, one who has taken time out of his incredibly busy schedule to come and speak with you all about his responsibilities. Before he even finished his announcement, there was a sudden buzz of excitement from the gathered students. That's right. Mizuki confirmed their suspicions. Here to talk to you all today is the Godime Hokage himself, Shimura Danzo-sama. The door to the classroom slid open and the Hokage walked in. He was an elderly man, using a walking cane to supposedly support his balance. Yet despite that he walked straight and tall. Over the ceremonial Hokage Haori he had a special sling of some kind to hold his right arm. His right eye too was covered in bandages that concealed half of his face and his spiky black hair. The other most noticeable feature was the X-shaped scar on his chin, his overall appearance telling a story rife with combat. Thank you for the introduction, Mizuki-sensei. Danzo smiled at the Chunin who stood now at attention before him. Why don't you take a seat while I take it from here? His one eye began to scan the class, pausing as it fell on the two sleeping in the back. Sakura felt a cold sweat break out, the power of his glare strong enough that she felt it despite not even being the target. Yet even in spite of this, neither Naruto or Shikamaru seemed to notice it at all. Either they were really that tired or just that stupidly brave. She suspected a bit of both. Mizuki must have noticed too, because even though he hadn't cared about it earlier, he was taking measures now. Hey, wake up you bastards. He reached into a pouch strapped to his hip, pulling out two shuriken that he threw in their direction. Sakura bit her lower lip in an effort to stifle the startled cry she let out. The shuriken hadn't been meant to hit them, just grazing the top of their hair and sending short strands falling. It had the desired effect, both boys picking their heads up, eyes blinking groggily as they attempted to figure out what was going on. In Naruto's case, he already had a string of drool sticking to his chin, that was how deep an instant his sleep had been. Ah, shit. Shikamaru seemed to realize their predicament first, sitting up straight for all of a second before slouching slightly back in his chair. It wasn't much, but it was probably the most respect he was going to be able to muster in the face of the Hokage. Naruto took a couple seconds longer, looking at the Hokage as if trying to place his face. Even he wasn't ignorant enough to not know who the Hokage was. Or so Sakura thought. Hey there, how's it going? Naruto asked, voice completely devoid of respect of any kind. For a moment it looked like he was about to put his head back down, not even waiting for an answer. Naruto. Mizuki wasn't going to have it, reaching for a second shuriken. Although this time with the intention of aiming it slightly more lethal than before. He only seemed to catch himself at the last second, taking a deep breath as he collected his nerves and slipped the partially drawn prosthetical back into its pouch. Since you seem to be on such good terms with Hokage-sama, why don't you do us the honors and give a brief history? Of course, what he was asking was impossible. He knew it and every single student here knew it. Naruto had the worst test grades of every single student in the class. History was also famously his worst subject, to the point it was actually a miracle if he scored any points at all on the tests. No, Mizuki's only aim here could be to embarrass Naruto further in front of the Hokage. Sakura didn't understand why, but Naruto's unpopularity extended far beyond the limits of the classroom and went even to the staff and teachers. She would have assumed it was just because he was a problem child, but even this was too much for that. Why me? Shikamaru was sleeping too. Naruto jumped to his feet, slamming his now gloved hands on the desk in front of him. Hey, don't get me involved, damn you. Shikamaru, in contrast to Naruto's loud yell, only spoke to him in a hushed whisper, just loud enough for the three of them. Do you know the answer or not, Naruto? You're wasting Hokage-sama's time. Mizuki ignored his attempt at a redirect, pushing him to give out some kind of information. No, he was waiting for him to just say he had no idea. That was the only possible answer Naruto could give. Naruto gaped like a fish out of water, eyes darting back and forth. It was almost painful to watch at this point, Sakura instinctively flipping open the textbook to the page necessary to help him. Yet she didn't know how she was possibly supposed to slide it over discreetly enough for him to be able to read it without giving them both away. let alone while under the watchful eye of the strongest shinobi in the village. In the first place, why was she even trying to help him? She didn't owe Naruto anything. Getting involved with him would only make her more hated than she already was. It was just sad to watch him. That's right, nothing more than secondhand embarrassment. That was what she determined. Be quiet, you're not helping. Naruto suddenly whispered. She almost apologized out of reflex, but realized a second later she hadn't even said anything yet. What? Slow down. He kept talking to himself, lips barely moving. Sakura glanced at Shikamaru, who looked back at her, both of them shrugging as they had no idea who Naruto was suddenly talking to. Time's up, Naruto. Mizuki didn't appear to notice. Or if he did, he probably thought he was just trying to ask one of them for help. Just admit you don't know anything already. At that last crack, Naruto's blue eyes hardened into solid steel. He inhaled a deep breath, presumably about to admit defeat. History of the Hokage, right? Only that wasn't what happened next at all. The Shodai Hokage was Senju Hashirama, who founded the village alongside his one-time rival, Uchiha Madara. They joined their clans together, forming the first ever shinobi village and creating the title of Kage. Something which was later copied by the other four great nations. His death marked the opening act of the Daiichiji Ninkai Taisen. After being betrayed by Madara and the other villages, despite having given them Biju as a bargaining chip for peace. Sakura blinked. What was happening right now? The information Naruto was saying wasn't just right, it was detailed. Far more so than the summary page she had flipped open to. So he couldn't be reciting that. No, this was information he just knew. And he wasn't done. After his death, his brother Senju Tobirama became the Nadaime Hokage. He is most known for being the founder of this very ninja academy and even took on students of his own, including the former Sandaime Hokage and the present Gadaime. He met his death just before the end of the Daiichiji Ninkai Taisen while battling against Kumogakure's Kinjin Kyodai. Just before his death, he named his student, Sarutobi Hiruzen, his successor. Unable to take it anymore, Sakura began flipping through her textbook. Had they studied all of this? No, Naruto had to be making some of this up because even she didn't know some of what he was saying. The Sandaime Hokage served the longest of any Hokage up to date, living through both the Dainiji Ninkai Taisen and most of the Daisanji Ninkai Taisen. He trained the group considered to have been Konoha's strongest ever team, the Sannin, before Orochimaru betrayed him at the end of the Daisanji Ninkai Taisen. Thought to be conspiring with Iwagakure, Orochimaru attempted to assassinate the Sandaime and the battle ended in both their deaths. Shikamaru flicked an eraser at Sakura, drawing her attention away from Naruto long enough to see him mouth out the words, "What the heck is going on?" To which she could only shrug. She had been hoping he knew. Perhaps they had been studying together or something. Someone had to be teaching him, because there was no way he knew all of this stuff before now. Had he? After the war, Namikaze Minato, also known as Konoha's Kiroi Senko, was chosen as Yondaime Hokage after being recognized as a hero of the war that was largely responsible for a Konoha victory. He died. Naruto suddenly paused. There was a moment's hesitation where Sakura thought maybe he finally lost the train of thought. It only lasted for a second before he continued as if nothing ever happened. He died defeating the Kyuubi no Yoko and saving the village from destruction. Having only served the village for a short time as its Hokage, the decision this time was made to elect someone who had survived numerous wars already. Thus Shimura Danzo was chosen, having been a student of the Nadaime and the Sandaime's former teammate. Naruto finished by inhaling deeply, as if just catching back all the breath he just let out. He then smiled down at Mizuki, as if daring him to say he made a mistake or didn't know what he was talking about. I get all that, right? Complete silence followed right after. No one said anything. That wasn't quite right. No one could say anything. Least of all Mizuki, who just continued to stare at Naruto, eyes bulging so far out of his head it looked like they might fall from his sockets. He wasn't alone in his surprise, every single student looking at Naruto with varying levels of wonder. He seemed to bask in their stares, placing his hands on his hips as he continued to smile triumphantly.